Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to the 12 tribes of the bloodline of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as the Bible said, the bloodline is scattered to the four corners of the earth through captivity and slavery. Shabbat Shalom to you, for your captivity will soon end. Greetings. Shabbat Shalom to those who are not of the bloodline of the 12 tribes of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're not of the Eidos, but they would like to serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they are of a repentant heart. Shabbat Shalom and greetings to you. Shabbat Shalom and greetings to those who are tired of religion and organized religion especially, and are frustrated with the violence, with the unjustness, with the unrighteousness, with the corruption, with the disease and death and unfairness that we are experiencing on planet Earth. Greetings to you. We have been studying Daniel, and we're actually in the last two chapters of Daniel. We were well into chapter 11, and we're going to be doing chapter 11 and chapter 12. Matter of fact, we may finish the book of Daniel this weekend. Shabbat Shalom to those in the chat, Junior Fatima. We may finish Daniel this weekend. We might, depending on, but we got some background stuff, because this is the thing, brethren. I want to go over just some couple of points before we get into this. I want to go over a couple points here. You all know how we've studied how when the Bible talks about in Daniel 7, the little horn, that's the Pope. That's the Pope of Rome, the little horn. But it's not like any specific Pope. Okay, it's not any specific Pope. It's the office of the Pope. You understand? It's not any specific Pope. I need you to understand that. So we're not talking about any specific Pope. It's the papacy, the organization, institution, and the office. And different people have occupied the office. So when the Bible is talking about that position and the different things, it's not talking about one particular, it indicates like it's one king, like it's one person, but it's not. It's a series of people that occupy that one office. I need you to understand. So when we're talking about, for example, the king of the north in Daniel 11, it's not one king. It's a series of leaders that end up becoming, which we're going to talk about tonight, the institution of the church. It's a series of leaders that it starts with emperors of pagan Rome and ends up being pontiffs of Holy Rome. Okay. So that I need you to understand that. And it's the same with the king of the south. It's not one person. It's a series of individuals and institutions, organizations that occupy the office that is opposing Rome. Okay. I need you to understand that as we're going through. Otherwise, you'll be confused thinking it's one person. It's not one person. It's a series of individuals. Okay. And I'm going to use Revelation to explain it better, because Revelation does divide it up by churches. In the 7 churches of Revelation, it divides it up. Now, when we get into the book of Revelation this time, you're going to see that the 7 churches and the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets go together. They're showing different angles of the same situation, and you're seeing a repeat of that situation from a different angle, from the church angle, from the seal angle, and from the trumpet angle. Okay, you're seeing different. You're going to see that. Now, tonight we're not going to go into the seals and the trumpets so much. I mean, we might touch base on the trumpets when we get to chapter 12, but on chapter 11, you're not going to see so much the seals and the trumpets, but you're going to see the churches. We're going to talk about the churches, okay? Especially the first 4 churches, of Revelation chapter 2, the first 4 churches of the 7. We'll be dealing with that because that's relating to Daniel 11, okay? And in order to understand the first church, I would like to go all the way back to the prophet Joel. All the way back to the prophet Joel. And we're going to start here tonight because that's going to help us understand the first church. In fact, let's look at the first church And let's start there actually in Revelation chapter 2, and then we'll come back to Joel and explain a little bit. Okay. So Revelation chapter 2. First, let's start at chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1, where Messiah, your apostle Yochanan or John sees Messiah, and he sees him as of golden candlesticks, 7 golden candlesticks, and he's wearing priestly robes. And we understand by that description that Messiah is in what the Bible called the holy place of the sanctuary. Now, Moses was told to build the sanctuary, and that sanctuary was a copy, as Hebrews tells us, of an original in the third heaven. And so when Yochanan saw Messiah, he saw him in that first part called the holy place, where there were 7 candlesticks, where there's a table of showbread, where there's an altar of incense. He saw him there. Then after he saw him there, he was, of course, as Daniel, he was awestruck by what he saw. And so, again, let's start at verse 12 of Revelation chapter 1. And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. And his countenance was as the sun shineth, excuse me, in his strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he laid his right hand upon me and said to me, fear not, I am the first and last. So you can see here, he's in the first compartment of the sanctuary, and he has in his hand 7 stars. Okay. And of course, we see the same description of him here as Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 10 when he was standing on the river Hiddekel. Okay. And he said, and then of course we see the apostle John have the same reaction. He said, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. Excuse me. Something was in my throat. Sorry. Okay. Verse 17. He said, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead, and he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, fear not, I am the first and the last. I am he that liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. I have the keys of hell and of death. Write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. Again, we talk about the 3 time periods of the book of Revelation. Things that have already happened, things that are happening now, and things that will happen in the future, so that at any point in the time, at the time in which we are living, there's something being fulfilled in the book of Revelation at any time. See, so right now, there's something that's being fulfilled in the book of Revelation. There's stuff that's already been fulfilled in the past, and there's things that's going to come in the future. We're going to talk more about that as we study the book of Revelation. Verse 19, he said, write the things which thou hast seen, past, and the things which are, present, and the things which shall be hereafter, future. Okay. Now, verse 20. The mystery of the 7 stars, which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. Let's stop there. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. What does that mean? An angel is a messenger. Remember now, an angel is a messenger. A ministering spirit, the Bible calls them, from the Most High. And they're bringing a message. And we saw Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation of Messiah Yahushua, which Yah gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it how? By his angel unto his servant Yochanan or John. So he, the Most High, sent a message through his son, which came through an angel, which came to the servant. Okay. Now, 7 churches, 7 angels, 7 messages which means there are messages or there's a theme for each time period of the 7 time periods that the Most High has set. He has set 7 time periods of the history of his church or his scattered nation in the Bible here. Let me also talk about this very briefly before we get into it heavily in Daniel chapter 11. When the Bible talks about a church, it is different from what we call a church today. Okay? When the Bible talks about a church, it is different than what we call a church today. The Greek word for church is ecclesia, which means called out assembly. Like the book Ecclesiastes, the King Solomon is preaching or teaching the church. Who is the church then? Ecclesiastes. Who is the call out assembly that Solomon's writing is meant for in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the book of the church? It is meant for the nation of Israel. Okay? So that when Stephen was given his testimony before his martyrdom, he said Moses led the church in the wilderness. What was Moses leading in the wilderness? The nation of Israel. So when the Bible talks about church, it is dealing with the nation of Israel. And why? Because the nation of Israel is the called out assembly. Where were they called out from? Egypt. Okay. And before that, Abraham was called out from Ur the Chaldees. Okay. He was called out from Ur the Chaldees. So the Most High said, leave Ur the Chaldees, leave your father's house, and I'm going to take you to the land I'm promising to you and to your seed. So that the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the church, the called out assembly. That has never changed. What did change, as we talked about a couple of lessons ago, is the establishment through paganism of Christianity. And what we're going to talk about today, the institution called church. So that today, when somebody says something about a church, they are talking about generally a Christian institution. An established entity with rules and regulations made by man. That is today's vernacular for church. That is not the Bible vernacular for church. So that any Gentiles in the Bible that are called into the body of Messiah, which is the church, they're called into, and we know this from Romans, what are they called into? They're called into the nation of the children of Israel. They're grafted in. Grafted into what? Grafted into the nation of the children of Israel. Okay? That's the church in the Bible. So that when they're talking about church, they're talking about Israelites that are either bloodline Israelites, or people that were Hellenists, or people that were Gentiles by blood that have been grafted into the commonwealth of Israel, as it says, as we know in Ephesians chapter 2. Before they came to Messiah, they were outside of the commonwealth of Israel. But now they are brought into the commonwealth of Israel through Messiah, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. Okay, this is one of the man-made terms that man has created into a paradigm to brainwash people. So that when you're reading the Bible and you see the word church, well, you think of your building. Could be a Baptist building or a Pentecostal building or an SDA building or Jehovah's Witness building. And you're thinking that that building and the institution it represents is the church. Been brainwashed that way over many centuries. But this is the benefit of studying The Bible only. Because when you see the Bible only, well, there's things you come to understand. I come to understand things I must learn and things I must unlearn. And that's one of the things I needed to unlearn. Church is not a building with a cross on it with white Jesus, stained glass windows. Church is ecclesia, the called out assembly of the nation of Israel. So here, when Messiah say that he has 7 angels to 7 churches, that's 7 time periods of his called out people in the history of the planet before the kingdom is established. Okay, so he said it's messages for each era, each time period. Okay, then he said the 7 candlesticks in which thou sawest are the 7 churches, or the 7 being a perfect number representing the nation of Israel. Okay, and the light of that we know from Zechariah is the Spirit of the Father that gives power to the nation. Okay, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Most High Yahweh. Okay, so now he has 7 stars in his hands, and there's messengers with messages to these 7 time periods. Now, the first time period here is represented, and we won't even need to go to Joel. I'm going to go to Acts for this one. Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 is represented. Now, this is, let's take a look. Acts chapter 2 first. Let's take a look at that. Okay. Okay. I'm going to begin at verse 1 of Acts chapter 2. I'm going to read down for a few verses so we see the context of what's going on here. And beginning at verse 1. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, what that means? Pentecost is the Feast of Weeks. That's what it is. Pentecost is the Feast of Weeks, the second feast of the 3 feasts of Israel. The second one, the Feast of Weeks. The first one is called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or the Passover, synonymous. 50 days later, Penti is the Pentecost, the 50th day. Actually was on the first day of the week. Okay? Because it's 7 weeks of Sabbath, 49 days. And then on the 50th day, which is the first day of the week, they'd have Pentecost. And they'd be at Jerusalem because that's where all feasts were taken, at Jerusalem. So all the people were at Jerusalem for this feast, and it was the day of Pentecost. Okay? Day of Pentecost. Okay? So now here they are, all the Israelites. Now at this time, we have to remember now, over the course of centuries, Israelites have been scattered from various attacks based on, of course, the Israelites' sin. Okay, so they were scattered by the Babylonians, and scattered by the Assyrians, and scattered by the Medes and the Persians, and scattered by the Greeks, and now the Romans. So over this course of time, Israelites have been scattered into different nations, mostly in Africa, but they came also from Europe, from Crete, and from Greece. They're scattered all over the place. Okay, and around the Mediterranean generally, North Africa, Egypt, in other places, but that's where they were. So here, when it was time for a feast, they all came to Jerusalem because that's where you keep the feast. That's why Simon of Cyrene was there, Simon of Cyrene, which is North Africa. That's why he was there, and they asked him to carry the cross for Messiah because he was too weak to carry it. He was there because it was Passover. He was an Israelite that his family apparently had relocated to Africa, and he came back for the Passover. And he was there, and he was carrying the cross for the Messiah. Okay, so here, Acts chapter 2, verse 1. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. See, all the Israelites had come to Jerusalem for the feast. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. See? Why? They had come from different nations because over the course, again, of centuries, they had been scattered into these different nations. And therefore, they had learned the language of these different nations. But then they came back for feasts. So here now, on this particular day, you had Israelites that had come from all of the nations where they had been scattered back to Jerusalem for the feast of the Pentecost. And the apostles were given the ability to speak so that people would hear what they were saying in their own language. This was no Babel. This was people hearing what the apostles were saying in their own language. And there was only 12 of them, and they were speaking more than 12 languages. But the people can hear, even words coming out of their mouth, they would hear. If they were, let's say today, they were Greek, they'd hear Greek. If it was Spanish, they hear Spanish. If it was Italian, they hear Italian. If it was French, they hear French. No matter what language it was, they would hear it in their language. Okay? But the Spirit of the Father gave them utterance. All right? All right. Verse 5. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men of every nation under heaven. Now, when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. See, again, it wasn't no Babel like the Pentecostal church talks about. They're under a spirit, the Pentecostal church. It's just not the fathers, because it's confusing. But this was, notice they said every man, they were confounded because there was more than 12 people out there, more than 12 languages they came from, and yet everybody heard their own language. Okay. Verse 7. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? Parthians, watch this, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers in Mesopotamia and in Judea and Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia. These are all different languages. And Phrygia and Pamphylia and in Egypt and parts of Libya about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians. We do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of Yah. See? So they were hearing in all of these languages from only 12 men the gospel of the Most High and of the Messiah. Okay, they were hearing it. All right? Okay, verse 12. And they were all amazed and were in doubt, saying one to another, what meaneth this? Others mocking said, these men are full of new wine. But Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and said unto them, ye men of Judea, and all ye that dwell in Jerusalem, be this known unto you, and hearken to my words. For these are not drunken, as ye suppose, seeing is but the third hour of the day. Now watch this. But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith Yah, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaids I will pour out in those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show wonders in the heaven above, and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. And the sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Master come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of Yahweh shall be saved. In verse 22, ye men of Israel. So he's talking to Israelites that had come from all over the world after being scattered. Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Yahushua of Nazareth, a man approved of Yah among you by miracles and by wonders and signs, which Yah did by him in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know. Him being delivered by determinate counsel and foreknowledge of Yah have ye taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. whom Yah hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holding up. Okay, so they're saying this is for you Israelites. This message, this Messiah came for you, and you killed it. Okay, so now, but he quoted the prophet Joel, which the Joel talks about. And now let's go to Joel real quick. Joel is before Amos, after Hosea. Joel chapter 2. And in Joel chapter 2, beginning at verse 23, it says, Be glad then, ye children of Zion, and rejoice in Yahweh your most high, for he hath given you what? The former rain moderately, and will cause to come down for you the rain, the former rain and the latter rain in the first month. What they experienced was the former rain. What we're getting ready to experience here by 2027 is the latter rain. Same prophecy. Former rain, latter rain. Now, in Revelation chapter 2, where we just started, let's go back there. Revelation chapter 2, the church of Ephesus was the former rain. This is what happened under that power. This started the year Messiah was crucified, AD 31, and went to AD 34 and went past that all the way into like the 2nd century, which is where we get to Diocletian in the second. But this was the initial early reign power. And so in Revelation chapter 2, he's talking about the church of Ephesus. That's the church that received the early rain, or the group of Israelites called out that have received the early rain of the power of the Spirit from the Father. Okay, so let's take a look in Revelation chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. And unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write, These things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks. I know thy works, and thy labor, and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil, and hast tried them which say they are apostles, and are not, and hast found them liars. We get ready to go to Jude in a second. I can see that coming. Hold on. Well, let's read this a little bit more. And has borne, and has patience, and has, for my name's sake, has labored, and has not fainted. Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. They left their first love. What is the first love? Well, let's ask the question that we should know, according to the Bible. What is the gospel? And what is the purpose of the gospel? According to what we read in Romans chapter 1, verse 16 and 17. What's the gospel? The gospel is the righteousness of Father being revealed through Messiah. Right? I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ apostle, right? For it is the power of Yah unto salvation, unto all that believe, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of Yah revealed from faith to faith. So the first love is Yah's righteousness. Why is that the first love? Well, brethren, if you've experienced, I already need to explain it to you. But if you haven't, let me explain to you. Before we know the Father's Spirit through Messiah, we are controlled by sin. We are controlled by sin. Okay? But when we receive the Spirit of the Father, which the Bible calls the Holy Ghost, when we receive that Spirit through Messiah, Messiah's name, it causes us to have the chains of sin to be broken off of us. And it becomes the first love. We begin to love the Father because of that spirit of righteousness that he gives us. It's not that we are righteous. This is where people get confused. It's not that we of ourselves are righteous. But the Father covers us in his robe of righteousness and declares us righteous, not because we in ourselves are righteous, but because of his own righteousness that covers us. It's given to us by grace, through faith. You cannot earn it. But the difference between what I'm talking to you in the Christian gospel is the Christian gospel stops right there and tells you there's no law. The true gospel says the righteousness that covers you causes you to obey Father's law. It gives you the power, a miracle working power, to cause you to be in harmony with the law of the Father. Therefore, it's your first love, because you did not have the strength nor the power to overcome your sin before you were set free by the Son and the Father's righteousness. Remember, if the Son therefore shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. That is why the perfect righteousness of the Father is the faith of Messiah. Remember, we read that. That's in Philippians chapter 3. That's in Romans chapter 3 and chapter 6. You know, that's in several places. Galatians chapter 2, verse 16 to 20. The faith of Messiah is Father's perfect righteousness. That's the faith. When the Bible talks about the faith, departing from the faith, that's Father's perfect righteousness. Let's take a look here. Let's go to Jude. Jude is the one-page book, basically. It's a letter that is one page that's before the book of Revelation. Jude. All right, we read from verse 1 of Jude. Jude, the servant of Yahushua Messiah and brother of James, to them that are sanctified by Yah the Father and preserved in Messiah Yahushua and called. Mercy unto you and peace and love be multiplied. Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints. So the faith is what? It is the righteousness of Father revealed in the repentant sinner. It is his power to cause us to overcome sin, to be forgiven of sin that are past, and to give power to overcome going forward so that it does not have dominion over us. And we can come to the Father and keep that robe of righteousness that he gives to us as a gift continually upon us to cause us to overcome. Oh, sometimes what happened here, this is what he getting ready to talk about. Look, that we should earnestly contend for the faith which is once delivered to the saints. Verse 4. For there are certain men crept in unawares who were before of old ordained to this condemnation. What condemnation? Ungodly men turning the grace of our Yah into lasciviousness and denying the only most high Yahweh and our master Yahushua Messiah. What does that mean? Turning grace into lasciviousness. That's saying, you know, there's no sin because you're under grace and there's no law. You heard that, right? Before? There's no law. Let's continue in sin that grace may abound, as the apostle said. That's turning the grace into lasciviousness, because the grace is given to overcome sin and to bring us into obedience and harmony with the Father's commands. It is not given to do away with the Father's commands. Now, in Revelation chapter 2, when they talk about the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which he hates, that's what he's talking about. People teaching that doctrine. And Paul will say their damnation is just. And he also said very strongly, if anybody preaches any other gospel than that which was delivered to you, he said, let them be accursed. And he repeated it. Because the gospel of perfect righteousness from the Father will take a person away from the clutches of the enemy and take a person away from sin. So that any other gospel except the perfect righteousness of the Father's Spirit causes us to what? Go back into sin. Therefore, it is an enemy of the truth. Okay? Revelation chapter 2. So they forgot their first love. They forgot that the power was from the Father's Spirit, and they started to think it was in their own strength. Have y'all seen that happen a lot today? It does happen. Might have happened to some of us, right? We start walking in the Spirit of the Father, and he's giving us victories. And all of a sudden, we start thinking the victories are stuff that we earned. And we forget that without the Spirit of the Father's righteousness, there is no victory. There is none. You are not justified of anything that you do. If you obey Father's commandments by the Spirit, that's what you're supposed to do. You don't get no points for that. You understand? So when he declares us innocent, it's not because we are really innocent, because we just never done anything wrong. It's because he's covering us with his own perfection through the Messiah who did no sin, so that we can overcome. Okay, but these people forgot that, and they started thinking that they were in the flesh. They forgot their first love. Okay, verse 5. Remember therefore for whence thou art fallen, and repent and do the first works, or else I will come unto thee quickly and will remove thy candlestick out of his place, except thou repent. But this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. So now that's the early reign power. Now in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, it doesn't really go into this period very, very strongly. What it does is very briefly goes and tells us that Rome is going to overthrow Jerusalem, and Messiah is going to be Messiah and his people are going to be part of that overthrow. But that's all it says. It doesn't really go. Now it goes into more detail under the second church of Revelation and the third and the fourth churches of Revelation, but not the first one. It doesn't really emphasize that as much. Okay, I don't know why, but that's what it is. But in Daniel chapter 11, remember it talked about. Let's go Daniel 11 verse 20. Daniel 11 verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. We saw this in Luke chapter 2. This was Caesar Augustus, which made a decree that said all the world should be taxed. There you go, right there, Daniel 11, 20, and there was Luke chapter 2, verse 1. Then after that, verse 22. Now it goes through many decades in just 2 verses here. And with arms of a flood shall they be overthrown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. So this is the movement that we saw in the first church, the early reign of the initial outpouring of Father's Spirit in that first century. Well, all of that, we saw what you're seeing in all of the New Testament, basically, book of Acts, all of Paul's writing. You're seeing all the stuff that happened prior to AD 70. That's what you're seeing. Okay, everything that's recorded in the New Testament between like the book of Acts, all the epistles of the Apostle Paul are prior to the destruction of Jerusalem. The only thing you read in the gospel, or should I say in the New Testament, that's after the destruction of Jerusalem is Revelation. Revelation was written after the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, it was written after. So that when John is writing this is what Messiah said, things that you have seen. This is in the past from when he's writing this. Because this was written AD 96. It was like 30 years almost after the destruction of Jerusalem and the overrun of the temple, by Titus. Okay, and Vespasian's army. Okay, so now from Daniel 11, we also went and we talked about the different Caesars that came. First it was Augustus, then it was Caligula, then there was the one that was there when Messiah actually started his ministry, and that showed us in Luke chapter 3. Let's go back to that. Luke chapter 3. Tiberius, I think it was Tiberius. Yeah, the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Luke chapter 3, when Messiah began his ministry. And then it goes on and it goes to different, like I said, when it's talking about the king of the north, it's various kings during the course of time. Now, you get all the way down to Daniel 11, and we did do all of this before, but so I want to start at the point we stopped. We stopped at Daniel 11. Let's see, we stopped at verse 20, 27, 28, because 28 is going into the second church of Revelation chapter 2. And we're talking about Diocletian, one of the most notorious Roman emperors against the Hebrews in history. Okay, now again, I want to reiterate, I want to point out, which we pointed out the last week when we studied this, at the time of the apostles in the first century, the apostles did not call themselves Christian. It was heathen unbelievers that called them Christos or Christianos in the Greek. It wasn't them. They called themselves disciples and followers. Remember, they were followers of the way, because Messiah was called the way, the truth, and the life. And in Acts chapter 9, they were followers of the way. And so Paul, when his name was Saul, was sent out to capture and arrest and put in jail anybody that was followers of the way. Because that Messiah was called the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by him. So therefore, they were different from the other Hebrews in that they were followers of Messiah, Yahushua of Nazareth, who said, you can't come to the Father except through him. That is why he was called the way. And so there was dissension, of course, between the Hebrews that believed in Messiah and those that didn't. And then, of course, to the heathen, they were all pains in the neck. Whether they were followers of the way or not, they were all just a bunch of Jews that were paying it. Okay, they weren't liked. Okay, so now when you get to Diocletian, he at this point in the book of Acts already showed us at some previous in the first century, even when Aquila and Priscilla were living in Rome, that Caesar had already said he wanted all the Israelites to depart from Rome. That's how much hatred was there for them. So this was not new. But then when Diocletian came, he decided, it was a particular 10-year period that he decided he was going to rid the earth of all Israelites, all people followers of the way or not. All Israelites are going to be just destroyed. Okay, especially in Europe. And that's where you get to Revelation chapter 2, the church at Smyrna. And we're going to read about it also in Daniel 11. Okay, Revelation chapter 2, beginning at verse 8. And unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things said the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried. And ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Now, at this point in AD 96, when John is receiving this had not happened yet. This was after his time. Okay, this was going to be in the 2nd century. Okay, after his time, 2nd and 3rd century, after his time. Actually, it was 3rd century under Diocletian. Okay, end of the 3rd century. And so during this 10 days, that's actually 10 years, he was killing as many Israelites as he could in Europe. He was the emperor of Rome, and he was killing as many of them as he wanted to rid the earth of them, basically. Similar to what happened with Esther, with Esther and Mordecai. The difference being this time, this was really under the scattering that was prophesied to take place. The 490 years, remember, it was over. Now it was time for slavery. It was time for real, serious, what we know now to be the most serious and heinous treatment of a people ever. Okay, to this day, than the Hebrews, right? So now back to Daniel chapter 11. It goes from verse 28, talking about the emperor of Rome, who is the king of the north. Then shall he return into his land with great riches. His heart shall be against the holy covenant. See, that's Diocletian. And he shall do exploits. Now, the word exploits here is damage. That's what it means in this particular case. It's damage and return to his own land. Okay, so that's Diocletian. Then at verse 29, at the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him. Therefore, he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. An arm shall stand on his part, and he shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. So now we're in a different period. Right here. He shall pollute the sanctuary of strength and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. This happened a couple of times in history. And actually, over time, we're going to know it's going to happen 3 times. Well, the first time it happened was when Caesar put his image in the temple, at the second temple in Jerusalem. He placed his image there. That's the first. That was what Messiah was warning about. When you see the abomination that maketh desolate stand in the holy place, that's Caesar's image in the temple. Okay. This second time is when Constantine became a Christian. Okay. Now, again, let's go to Revelation chapter 2. Now, I want to tell you something. Beware when man places a name created by man on something created by Yah. Let me say that again. Beware when man places a name on something created by Yah with a man-made name. What do I mean? The Most High, his name is Yah. That's the name he gave to the Israelites. When he introduced himself to Moses, he said, Ahia, Ashar, Ahia. Moses said, what is the name of the God I should tell him, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? What should I tell the children of Israel? He said, I am that I am. He said, Ahia, Ashar, Ahia. Thus shalt thou tell the children of Israel, Ahia sent you unto me, sent me unto you. Ahia was what he's saying in the first person, I exist. Okay, I exist. Ahia, I exist. Then he told Moses later, he said, your fathers knew me by the name, and in English it says Lord God Almighty, which is Al Shaddai. They knew me by the name Al Shaddai. But by my name, and then it put in big letters, it says Jehovah. But of course, that's not the Hebrew. The Hebrew is Yahweh. Yahweh. By my name, Yahweh. What does that mean? Yah exists. So now he's speaking of himself in the third person. Yah exists. First he tells Moses, Ahia, Ashar, Ahia, I exist. Then he says, Yahweh, Yah exists. And when you look at this in the original, like King James Version, the 1611, like the original, you're going to, if you're used to reading regular English, it's going to blow your mind because all the letters are different. There's no J's in the original because the letter J didn't exist until after 1611, just to let you know. There was no letter J in Hebrew or Greek or English before 1611. Okay, which is why we know they didn't call the Messiah Jesus, because there's no J. When you look in the original King James, that is mostly taken from Tyndale's Bible, Tyndale's translation, it says Jesus. And in that part where I just told you in Exodus chapter 3, it says yea, and then you'll see a V, and you look at a V and you say va, right? But in ancient English, V wasn't va. It was wow, like a U. Wow. And you say, well, how come it's not you? Like some people say, Yahuwah. How come it's not like that? I wish I had a piece of paper I could show you. Wait a minute. Yeah, I do have a piece of paper. Hang on. Let me show you this. I don't know if you'll be able to, you can see this, right? I don't know if you'll be able to see it because you see this? It's probably backwards to y'all, right? It is backwards to y'all. Well, that's Yah, right? You see it backwards. Yah. What people say is they put Yahoo. They go like this. Yahuwah, right? But what they're missing is right here. There's an A. There's an A right there. And so when you take A-U-A, how does that sound? Hawa. That's how it sounds. Hawa. Hawa. Okay? Hawa. So that's why we say Yah, Hawa. And when you look it up in the concordance, there's two different things. There's two different concordance. One goes with Ahia and one goes with Yahweh. And they both mean to exist. Okay, I exist, Yah exists. Okay, so So now Moses was told his name is Yahweh. That was his name, right? But now, with that name, that was the name of the God the Israelites served, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay. And he gave Israel that name. He said, your name is not Jacob anymore. I'm changing your name to Israel, which means Yashar, which means right with the Most High. Yashar means to be right with. Al means the Most High. Right with the Most High. So now he said, I'm changing name. So the name Israel came from the Most High. And then he said, now you're Israel, you're children of my servant Israel, and you're my people, and my name is Yahweh. He never gave them the name of any system of worship. Like he didn't say, this is the name of your religion. He never said that. And in fact, he said to them, if you put your tool on something for me, you polluted it. So now the heathen were calling the followers of the way Christians. And Constantine became a Christian. And what did he do? First, it was a man-made name that he decided to make on a religion. And what he also did is he told the Israelites, the followers of the way, I want to become a Christian, but I got to keep some of my traditions too. Like I can't just worship one God. That's what he said. I can't just worship one God. Now, what's the problem with that, brethren? The first commandment of the covenant between Yah and his people, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything. So that, of course, would not fly with followers of the way. But there had been so much bloodshed under Diocletian, and then even after Diocletian, that Constantine said, don't you want your, let's have peace. I'll become a Christian and I'll keep some of my other gods and we'll have peace. We'll all be Christians. And there were followers of the way that said, no way. That's not going to fly. But there were leaders that caved. And the reason they caved is because they were offered positions of influence with Constantine. Okay, and that's where you get in Revelation chapter 2, Pergamos. And I want you to notice in Pergamos the mention of Balaam. The mention of Balaam in Pergamos. Why? Who is Balaam? Balaam was a turncoat. Balaam sold out his faith for money. If you look him up in Numbers, he sold out his faith to Moab for money. And he ended up, because of money, scheming against his own cousins with the Moabites. That's who Balaam was. Go look him up in the book of Numbers. Okay? That's where the donkey talked to him. Because he was trying to get this money. And he was selling out to do it. And that's why he's mentioned in Pergamos, because under Constantine's conversion to Christianity, that's why if you look at some ancient writings from early Christians, and they're talking about the time of Constantine and before that, they'll call the followers of the way Christians because that's what pagans called them. They didn't call themselves Christians, and the Bible never said. In fact, the Bible mentions the word Christian 3 times. Each time it's by a pagan, except the third time when Peter, who was the apostle to the Israelites, he was the apostle to the Israelites, as Paul was the apostle to the Gentile. Peter said to his Israelite brothers, who he said, greetings to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. He said, if they call you Christian, don't worry about it. Don't be ashamed. He said, you suffer like a Messiah. See, why would he have to tell them that? Because it was shameful. It was an epithet. It was nasty. It was like nigger. It wasn't good. Okay? He said, if they call you that, don't worry about it. Don't get hot. Don't get robbed. Okay? So now Constantine said, I'm going to become a Christian. I'm going to be a Jesus freak. But I got to keep some of my other gods too. And some of the Israelites said, okay, yeah, let's do that. Some said no. And that's what we get here. Pergamos. That was the beginning, the roots of what became Christianity in the Roman Catholic Church. Pergamos Revelation chapter 2, verse 12. And to the angel, the messenger of the church in Pergamos, write, these things said he which hath the sharp sword with two edges. I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is, and thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas, my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelt. Talking about, he's referring back to the Diocletian days here. Okay, but I have a few things against thee. What's the problem? Because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, as Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a block before the Israel, to eat and sacrifice unto idols, and to commit fornication. That's what Balaam schemed with the heathen for money against his people to do. Look it up in the book of Numbers for yourself. I'm not going to read all that today, but look it up in the book of Numbers for yourself. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of Nicolaitans. There it is again. So in other words, is righteousness by works. I could worship all these different gods and be saved. I'm under grace. Y'all think this is some new stuff? I mean, it's relatively new because it didn't go back. Messiah didn't teach that. Paul didn't teach that. This came with Constantine. This came with the establishment of Christian church, which later became the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. Verse 15. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of Nicolaitans, which things I hate. Repent, or else I will come against thee quickly, and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit said unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth, saving he that receiveth. There you go. That's Constantine's time. Now let's go to Daniel 11 and take a look at it from Daniel's perspective, because Daniel saw it way before John saw it. It was given to Daniel first. You see, the Most High does that, right? He gives words to the prophets. And as I said before, I'll say it again. All the book of Revelation is a compilation of the prophets of the Old Testament, particularly Daniel, but not just that. Okay? They're all prophets in the book of Revelation. This is not stuff that's just showing up there. Well, it's just showing up there if you don't read the prophets. If you don't know, it's in the prophets, but it's in the prophets. Okay. Daniel chapter 11. Let's look at Pergamos in Daniel chapter 11. Verse 31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. What does this mean? They took away the true Israelite people and replaced them with Christians. That's what's the beginning right there. They took away the true Israelite people and replaced them with Christians. So that we're all brainwashed now. We think a church is a building with a cross on it. We think Christianity was founded by Messiah, and it wasn't. The Bible never speaks of Messiah starting a new religion. He's just the sacrifice that Moses was told to kill. That's who Messiah is. He's the sacrifice that Moses was told to kill and bring that blood to the sanctuary. He is the Lamb. There's no change. There's no change except in the priesthood. So now the priesthood was Levi. Now it's Judah. And of course, Hebrews chapter 5, 6, and 7 explains that. That's the change. But there's no new religion. And people like to talk about a new covenant. The same people never read what the Bible says about the new covenant. They're only repeating what their heathen pastor told them about the new covenant. Because if you read the new covenant in both Jeremiah chapter 31 and Hebrews chapter 8, what you will find is the new covenant is with Israel and Judah. I will make a new covenant, he said, with Israel and Judah. He didn't say nothing about Hebrew, about heathen. He didn't say nothing about Gentile. I'm making a new covenant with Israel and Judah. Now, the Gentiles that will be included are ones that are grafted in to Israel and Judah. He ain't say nothing about Christianity being no new covenant. And he said, I'm going to write my law in their hearts. Not do away with my law. He said, I'm going to write my law in their heart. That's why, brethren, in these last days, I mean, y'all, when y'all get to this point where you understand this, you don't need to wear tassels on the bottom of your garments. You don't need to wear tassels. Why? Because he's writing the law in your heart by the perfect righteousness of his spirit, which is called the gospel. That's why. The tassels were given to the Israelites to remind them of the law. Blue tassels remind them of the law. But now he's saying, I'm going to write my law in your hearts by my spirit, you Israelites. Okay? And by my spirit, Ezekiel chapter 36 said, I'm going to cause you to walk in my statutes. You shall keep my judgments and do them. Okay? When you're ready for that, you can take off them tassels. When you're ready. Okay? Daniel chapter 11. So now, they take away the daily sacrifice. That means they're replacing the Israelite economy with Christianity. And this was the beginning of Christianity, which would become the Roman Catholic Church, which would later become Protestant Christianity, Evangelical Christianity, and Catholic Church, which are now all the same thing. Okay. Now, verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flattery. See, that's Balaam. But people that do know their Most High shall be strong and do exploits. Now, this is exploit. This is powerful things by the Spirit of the Father. These are martyrs that gave their life for the true Messiah and the covenant of the true Most High, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were not Christians. They were called Christians by the pagans that killed them. Okay. Verse 33. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. Remember now, this is after the destruction of Jerusalem. We are scattered, as the Messiah said, we shall be brought into captivity unto all nations and by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. At this point, this is what's going on. We're being persecuted, being killed. Those in Africa are in hiding. Okay. And that's just the beginning, because this all right here that I'm reading to you is the 4th century. 3rd century was Constantine. I'm not Constantine. I'm sorry. 3rd century was Diocletian, end of the 3rd century, and then you go into the 4th century with Constantine. Constantine's doctrine is built up over a couple of centuries. You get to the 6th century, and you got Christianity. You got the Pope of Rome. You got the institution that is established. Now it's now 1:03, an hour and 3 minutes. I'm gonna continue this tomorrow, but I'm gonna stop here. But we stop in here with Constantine. By the time we go tomorrow, we're gonna be talking about the establishment of the institution of the church, which is now what we call church. Okay. And with the establishment of the institution of the church in the 6th century, you get to the 7th century is where Islam came. The 6th century, the Christian church came. The 7th century AD is where Islam came. The 8th century is where Judaism came. Okay. And when Islam came after the 6th century, between Islam and Christianity, they came from both sides into Africa. One from the east, that is the Muslims, and then from the west, from the Atlantic, was the Europeans, and they're already starting to take over, rape, pillage, and destroy Israelites. Okay, and so we'll talk about that tomorrow. Yeah, we'll stop here tonight. But yes, I gave you a lot to chew over today. So we'll stop here and we'll start at verse 35 tomorrow by the grace of the Most High. All right. I pray that the Most High guide you and cause you to learn much and unlearn much, and cause his spirit of perfect righteousness to rest upon you, that you'll be covered in his righteousness. He declares you righteous because of his own righteous robe that covers you, and that you be blessed and your name be known in the third heaven. Shalom.